Good evening, everyone. I think now will be a good time to get started here at 7 o'clock. So we'll be punctual and get started. Just want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight for our Chats from the Stacks program. This is a new series that the Collections Department at the Chester County History Center is starting. This is only our second one of the year. We had one last year. And basically what it is, as the last Thursday of every month, a member of the Chester County History Center's collection team, that includes the library, the photo archives, the museum, and the county archives, we are going to come on and just talk about what we do at the Chester County History Center. That might be a conversation about, the logistics of our job, some of the projects we work on. It might be like tonight, I'm talking about a really interesting local history story. It might be something about a research tool that we created. The big thing is that this is free for members. So if you're a Chester County History Center member, these programs are going to be absolutely free. If you're not a member, thank you for joining us. If you like what you see, we recommend taking a look at membership, because this will be one of the advantages and perks of membership is having free access to these programs moving forward. So you can find out more about membership at myccHC.org. Next month, March 31st, that's going to be, again, the last Thursday in March at 7 p.m. We'll be back for another Chats from the Stacks program. And in that program, we will be looking at our 1777 Chester County Property Atlas. That's a project that we're really excited about. It seems to be gaining a lot of excitement among researchers and members of the public. So we're excited to kind of take a look at that project. And that, again, will be March 31st at 7 p.m. So stay tuned for that. So tonight's program, we are going to be looking at a story that's in the north central part of Chester County. If you're not familiar with Chester County, this is, again, right in the north central part, right out or below Pottstown, above Exton. That's just a general area we're looking at tonight. And I will say, if someone wants to count how many times I say the word Uwchlan tonight, it probably will be quite a few. And for me, if you see the word Uwchlan, it's probably the most intimidating word you can see at face value. I remember the first time I saw that term, I was like, how the heck do you say Uwchlan? So if anything you take away tonight, it will be how to pronounce the word Uwchlan, because again, I will be saying it a whole bunch. And just keep in mind, anytime I say the word Uwchlan, I am going to be meaning both Uwchlan and Upper Uwchlan Township. This thumb that I call it, we'll be talking about the thumb. It's a part of Upper Uwchlan Township today, but back before 1858, Uwchlan and Upper Uwchlan, they were one township. It wasn't until 1858 that Uwchlan and Upper Uwchlan split. Everything before that, again, is just going to be consistently referred to as Uwchlan. So just want to make that clarification from the start. And Uwchlan Township, what does it mean? Well, it comes from a Welsh phrase meaning high above the valley. Chester County has a great valley. Historically, it's been called the Great Valley. That's the area around Paoli, Malvern, Exton, Downingtown. And Uwchlan is just going to be just north of that. So a lot of the Welsh settlers who settled in this area refer to it as an area above the Great Valley. So they called it Uwchlan. And how did I uncover this story? Well, I mean, just look at that border, right? Look at Upper Uwchlan Township, and we look at a lot of maps every day at the county archives because we have a lot of land records. So we're constantly looking at maps, and I couldn't help but to ask just a straightforward question. Basically, what's up with this border? Why does Upper Uwchlan Township look the way it does? And I went down a really interesting rabbit hole, did some research, and uncovered a pretty unique story. And I shouldn't say uncovered, because there has been a lot of scholarship on this story. So I should say I learned about. I became aware of the history of Upper Uwchlan Township. And that's what we recommend as archivists. Anytime a researcher comes into the research room, they basically, a lot of them start off with very broad expectations. They just want to learn as much as they can. And we always try to encourage them to ask a specific question. Okay, what questions are you looking to answer? And when you have a specific question, that's when you can get really narrow in your research, and that's when you can get some really useful information. and uncover some interesting stories. So good research always comes from asking good questions. And this question that I asked was, again, why does Upper Uwchlan Township look the way it does? Because it has a really interesting shape. And I did mention, again, the presentation I will be hosting tonight is a very quick, abbreviated version of a really complex and difficult story. There's a lot of nuances to this story. A lot of the primary sources that will be discussed tonight, I didn't have the opportunity to look at, because a lot of the characters in this story were English investors. So they were corresponding over in England. Of course, I don't have access to those archives, so I used a lot of secondary sources. And there have been researchers before me who have done a much better job and much more thorough research of this story. Two of them I can recommend is Estelle Kremer's book, 1989. This is a really useful one. Anyone interested in Vincent Township, what became East and West Vincent, and the Pikelands, East and West Pikeland. She kind of takes the story that we're going to tell tonight and applies it specifically to these two townships. And then Albright Zimmerman, it's a quick article. It's about 15 pages, but he uses a lot of primary sources involving correspondence and communication between the characters involved. So again, if you're looking for a more thorough historical research approach to this program, I suggest taking a look at those sources. If you want to learn more about it and maybe hear more about it, I actually created a short 15-16 minute video on the history of Upper Uwchlan Township and West Vincent. And you can find that video by going over to our website, which is chesco.org/archives, and hitting our YouTube button. It's the last video on our YouTube channel. Again, it's basically going to be a lot of the same information I present here tonight, but a much more polished version, less awkward phrases and ums and rights and me stumbling over my words here. And the program, I divide the program into three parts. The first part is a lot of background information. It's a very broad approach, right? Again, I'm going to be talking about a lot of characters who never came to Chester County, never came to colonial North America. They were land speculators, English investors. They were doing all of their corresponding over in England. So this is a very broad approach, but again, it's necessary background to understand the story of Upper Uwchlan. The second part, we're going to be looking at Uwchlan, so we're getting a little bit more focused on this local area. We're going to be talking about a man named David Lloyd, who many historians have credited to being one of the most significant individuals in the development of Upper Uwchlan Township. We're going to talk about him and Uwchlan Township. And the third part, we're going to get even more specific, right? We're going to be looking directly at that thumb that I call it the thumb of Upper Uwchlan Township. So again, we're going to start very broad, and then as we go throughout the program, we're going to get much more specific. And before I dive in, I'm just going to turn off my camera so you guys don't see me talking with my hands, because this is, again, a complex story and I have a bad tendency to speak with my hands. So I'm going to save myself the embarrassment and turn off my camera. But if you have any questions or you need me to clarify anything, I am monitoring the chat. So feel free to send me a message in there. But first, we need to start by looking at William Penn, right? William Penn, we all know the story. In 1681, William Penn, he receives his royal charter from King Charles II for an area of land that had about 45,000 square miles. And to put that into perspective, we're talking about a tract of land that's larger than Wales, larger than Ireland, larger than Scotland, and almost as large as England. So the King of England gave William Penn this huge tract of land. Why did he do that? Why did the King Charles II give William Penn a land? Well, we all know the story. The king owed Penn's father, Admiral William Penn, a large debt. During the 1600s, England was involved in a lot of civil wars. The Admiral of the Navy, he played a significant part in these civil wars, so he accumulated a debt that the king owed him, and King Charles II had to owe the Penn family this debt. So that's one reason he gave Penn this land, to settle a debt. A second reason was William Penn, he was a Quaker, right? He was this leading figure among the Quakers. And Nowadays, we have this tendency to think of Quakers as peaceful, they're pacifists, right? They're non-aggressive individuals. So what was King Charles II's beef with or problem with the Quakers? Well, Quakers at the time, they were considered radical, right? They believed in personal salvation. They didn't need an authority figure to save them or guarantee their passage into heaven, right? They said that salvation comes through their personal beliefs and their personal manners and their actions. They didn't need a church or an authority figure. And think about how the king would have responded to that, right? He is basically the figurehead of the Church of England, and he is an authority figure. So you have these Quakers telling him, we don't need the king. So you have this really heated relationship between the King of England and this, that he would consider radical group of Quakers. So the idea that he can give a leading figure of the Quakers this large tract of land on the other side of the ocean and hopefully get rid of this, what he would consider Quaker problem, that was a good deal for him. Thirdly, again, we have to remember we are in an age of empires. The English, King Charles II, they are building an empire. They want to exert as much political, economic, and cultural influence among the world as they can. And if he has an individual who's willing to settle a part of North America and bring back some wealth to England, he's going to be on board for that as well. So again, King Charles II, he gives William Penn a huge tract of land for 45,000 square miles. Again, what you're looking at here is basically the opening line of the charter King Charles II gave to William Penn. It's just standard language talking about the desire to enlarge the English empire, to bring, love of civil society and Christian religion to this savage natives over there. Standard language, right? But basically, it goes to prove that the king was interested in expanding the English empire, and we should remember that moving forward in this story. But because William Penn had so much land, he needed to invest in this land. He couldn't just have a big tract of land with no people or no money invested into it. So what did he do? He turned it to the investors. He turned to his friends in London who had a bunch of money they could invest. One of these men was a man named Dr. Daniel Coxe. Dr. Coxe and William Penn, they were familiar with each other. I want to say they were friends or good acquaintances, but they were at least aware of each other for two reasons, right? Penn had this relationship with the King of England, and so did Dr. Daniel Coxe. He was the court physician, and he was a true Renaissance man. He was a man, in my opinion, who embodied the principles of the Enlightenment. He studied science. He wrote in medical journals, did chemistry experiments. He was a statesman. Later in his career, he serves as governor of West New Jersey. And he was also a businessman, right? He was interested in making a profit. I think a good comparison would be Benjamin Franklin, right? Benjamin Franklin, he was a scientist. We all know about his science experiments. He was a businessman. He invested in the printing press, or he had a printing press. He had a newspaper, but he was also a statesman. So Dr. Coxe, he is, again, one of these enlightened fellows who is just well-rounded in science, in politics, and in business. I really like this quote by Albert Zimmerman. He was one of the sources I referenced at the very beginning. He called Dr. Coxe one of the most active of the schemers who dreamed of wealth and empire in the New World. And you'll see by some of the quotes I use from Dr. Coxe, he was very ambitious when it came to investing in land in North America. He invests, of course, in Chester County. He invests in East New Jersey and West New Jersey, in the Mississippi Valley, later the Carolinas. He wanted to capitalize on this cheap North American land and just flipping it for a quick profit. He was particularly obsessed with the idea of the fur trade. The fur trade was a very important resource in colonial North America. The French Empire had practically built their entire colonial empire in North America on the fur trade, especially beavers. So in 1688, so this is a few years, we're jumping ahead a few years, but Dr. Coxe, he kind of comments on why he's so attracted to North America. And he's specifically speaking about this great lake where beavers come every year from French Canada and he knows about this Great Lake that he wants to invest in. He's really interested in this Great Lake. So what is this Great Lake? It's actually Lake Erie, yeah, funny enough. So he is very interested in investing in Lake Erie, which goes to prove that Dr. Coxe really wasn't familiar with the topography and the layout of Pennsylvania, because he didn't realize how far away Lake Erie actually was. So he wanted to invest in cheap land out here in Pennsylvania and basically exploit the fur trade around the Lake Erie area. So he devised this company. He was an early investor in what became known as the New Mediterranean Sea Company. And don't overlook that name, the New Mediterranean Sea. We all know how important the Mediterranean Sea had been historically for a lot of the history's most important empires, right? We're talking about the Roman Empire, the Egyptian Empire, Ottoman Empire. They all used the trade around the Mediterranean Sea. And basically, Dr. Coxe was saying, Lake Erie, that's going to be my Mediterranean Sea. I am going to turn Lake Erie and all the fur trade around it into my Mediterranean Sea. So Dr. Coxe, along with about 24 other investors, they started this company called the New Mediterranean Sea Company. What Dr. Coxe did was he actually got together with a friend, Sir Matthias Vincent, who he was a knight. He was knighted by King James II. That's why we refer to him as Sir Matthias Vincent. And then Major Robert Thompson. Major Robert Thompson, he had a storied and very busy military career. And again, remember, 1600s, England was very, very active with military engagements. You had multiple civil wars, you had the Glorious Revolution, you had the King of England having his head cut off by the pro-parliament individuals under Oliver Cromwell. England was it was a harsh time. It was a brutal time. There was a lot of military engagement. So Major Robert Thompson, he had retired from the military. He wanted a peaceful retirement. So he went in on this North American fur trade. So between Dr. Coxe, Sir Matthias Vincent, and Major Robert Thompson, the three of them purchased 30,000 acres in Chester County. The 30,000 acres, it was located along the Schuylkill River. And the Schuylkill River would have been a very important artery to Philadelphia. This major river, it would have fed right into the port in Philadelphia. So it was a very important piece of land that these three gentlemen purchased. And it should be noted that they each purchased 10,000 acres of this 30,000 acre tract. They didn't have surveyed and identified individual tracts. They just collectively, they each had 10,000 acres share. So between the 30,000 acres, Dr. Coxe had 10,000 acres, Thompson, Vincent, they each had 10,000 acres. It wasn't individually laid out to them, but they had a right to 10,000 acres in this 30,000 acre tract, which again, this is the area that is today East Vincent, West Vincent, East Pikeland, West Pikeland, Spring City, South Coventry. So that's the area we're talking about in this area. This is a really interesting map. It was created in 1687. So just a year after the three individuals made their purchase. I forgot to mention that they purchased this land in 1686. In 1686, they purchased the 30,000 acres. 1687 is one of the earliest maps of the settled parts of Pennsylvania. It was created by a man named Thomas Holmes, who was William Penn's surveyor general, who would have had a very important part. He's kind of the guy going out there and laying out and identifying Pennsylvania's political boundaries. Pennsylvania has a lot of political or boundary disputes, right? We know about the Mason-Dixon line. We know about the disputes they have with New York to the north. So Thomas Holmes, he was the one going out there and kind of surveying, doing a lot of the surveying. 1687 map, we see where he surveyed the 30,000 acres to the three individuals, but he made a mistake. He includes Dr. Daniel Cox's name. He includes Matthias Vincent's name, but he overlooks Major Robert Thompson. He actually misidentifies the owners as Adrian Verhausen and Benjamin Furley. They eventually have some stake in the claim. Decades later, or about a decade later. But unfortunately, there is an error in this map, and it causes a whole bunch of confusion later on. And we'll see some of those confusions later on. But we see based on this map where their property was clearly surveyed. And again, we don't see basically a section carved out for Vincent or a section carved out for Coxe. It's just saying collectively, these three men own 30,000 acres along the Schuylkill River. But it should be noted that they never actually received the patent for this property, which is an issue. In Pennsylvania, William Penn had a very strict process for settling land. Basically, someone had to get a warrant, basically a promissory note saying, okay, we laid out or we intend to give you X number of acres. And that's what the three individuals received. They received a warrant for 30,000 acres. Unfortunately, they never received the patent, so they never actually truly became in full possession of the property, which will contribute to some of the issues we'll see moving forward. And I should say that this system of land settlement, it was an attractive scheme William Penn used to get people to invest in Philadelphia. Basically, what William Penn did, he recognized a lot of people wanted to invest in the prime real estate, which would have been in the city of Philadelphia. So he set up this system where if someone purchased 10 acres in the city of Philadelphia, he would have given them a warrant to 500 acres out in the country, whether that's Bucks County or Chester County. So what you see is someone received a warrant from William Penn for 500 acres in, let's say, the 1680s or 1690s, and they just die with that warrant. They never have it patented or surveyed. So, generation after generation, they're just passing down this right to 500 acres without actually having it surveyed. So, you might have a warrant for 500 acres taken out in 1690, but it's never actually surveyed or patented it decades later. So it was a complex system, but Penn needed this because, again, he has such a large area of land and he wanted an orderly system to settle that land. But it's also important to keep in mind that this 30,000 acres that they had purchased, it was only the beginning. They wanted this basically to start the new Mediterranean Sea Company. Essentially, what they wanted to do, they wanted to buy 100,000 additional acres, which would act as a land bridge connecting the Schuylkill River and the 30,000 acres all the way out west to Lake Erie. Again, they would get the beaver furs, the bear furs, the furs from wildcats, and use their land bridge, which would have been that 100,000 acres, taken it all the way to the Schuylkill River, sent it down into Philadelphia, and exported it back over to Europe. It was a very grand and ambitious plan that Dr. Coxe and his friends in the New Mediterranean Sea Company had. And it sounds like a good plan. And actually, it was considered by William Penn. So based on scholarship, we know that William Penn he drafted a warrant for the 100,000 acres. Basically, there is an archive over in England, the Bedfordshire Archives, and they had a warrant by William Penn granting 100,000 acres for, quote, the formation of a company to be called the New Mediterranean Sea Company. So the fact that he had a warrant drafted for 100,000 acres proves that he considered this plan by Coxe and the New Mediterranean Sea Company, but it was never signed. It was never executed by Penn. And this caused for some frustration by the New Mediterranean Sea Company. And we have to ask, why didn't William Penn execute this warrant? Was it because he feared giving only a few men this much land in Pennsylvania? They would have had a lot of say in the development of his colony. So maybe he was fearful of that. Did he have a distrust of monopolies? Probably. Again, William Penn, he recognized the importance of the fur trade. And if he was to give a few men that much power in the fur trade, he might be making a bad financial investment himself. And it's also important to realize that William Penn, there was uncertainty in the western border of Pennsylvania. The charter William Penn received from King Charles II basically gave him everything east of the Delaware River, north of Maryland, and south of New York. The western border wasn't very specific. So there was uncertainty where his colony ended, and there were disputes that William Penn had with New York. We see the governor of New York makes this quote, basically saying, hey, if the Pennsylvania continues to take advantage of the fur trade, people of New York, they're not gonna have a say in this, they're gonna lose out. So the governor of New York, he's protecting his individuals. William Penn, he doesn't wanna, butt heads with the governor of New York. So he's having reservations about granting this much property to a few individuals. The important thing we know is that William Penn, he doesn't make this land purchase. We don't know if he flat out refused it or he was just procrastinating. We know maybe he was considering it and it just got pushed down the line, or maybe it was an outright refusal. We're not certain, but we do know that Dr. Coxe, Thompson, Vincent, the New Mediterranean Sea Company, they never received the patent for either the 30,000 acres or the 100,000 acres. So they were not in effect in ownership of this huge tract of land. Dr. Coxe, he becomes interestingly frustrated. Remember this quote earlier where he's talking about a great lake out west that he's really interested in that has all this fur. That quote goes on to say, and I'll read it here, and he's basically saying people not to doubt that he will bring the greatest part of the said traffic for furs into the part of the country where I am settled. By my patent, and by my patent, I am entitled to the said trade exclusively. He's saying based on this patent that he thinks he acquired from William Penn, but again, we know Penn didn't execute it. Coxe is saying, by that patent, I am entitled to this trade exclusively. I can exclude the inhabitants of Pennsylvania from the fur trade by my grant. I and some other people have received from William Penn. So we're starting to get a little insight into Dr. Coxe's attitudes. He's a very ambitious man. He's saying he received a patent from William Penn, and he's saying based on this patent, I monopolize the trade first. So he's a very ambitious individual. So we can kind of see why William Penn might have not been on board with this plan. But Dr. Coxe, remember, he purchased the 30,000 acres originally in 1686. He will spend about the next 4, 5, 6 years basically fighting William Penn, saying he is the true owner of this huge tract of land in Chester County, and William Penn, he is not on board with this idea. So Coxe, he's hitting a lot of frustrations with this property already. But to make matters worse, Sir Matthias Vincent, he dies very early on in 1687. Sir Vincent, he dies. So Dr. Coxe, he is desperate. He still wants to see his business plans go through. So he talks to Vincent's estate saying, hey, I will purchase Vincent's 10,000 acre share, or you can remain invested in this company. Just help me out. He's still interested in Vincent's share, but Vincent's family, they want no part of Coxe's ambitions. They see how difficult it is basically asserting their ownership of the property. They see that Coxe and Penn are entangled in this nasty conversation about the legal status of the property. So they basically straight up sell their right to 10,000 acres. Again, they want to wash their hands clean of the 10,000 acres that Vincent had in this property. So they sell their right. They sell the warrant right to a guy named Joseph Pike. Joseph Pike in 1705, he actually receives the patent for 10,000 acres. Again, once we receive the patent, then that's when we're going to have a nice carved out area. So the 10,000 acres that Vincent died with, his estate sells it to Joseph Pike. Joseph Pike patents the property, and this area will eventually become Pikeland Township. So there is some great irony in the fact that Vincent's 10,000 acre share doesn't become the area that became East and West Vincent, that's named after him. It actually becomes Pikeland Township. So again, remember, Coxe, he's having difficult conversations with Penn about the status of the property. 2, Vincent dies in 1687, and in 1691, that's when he gets a third strike because Robert Thompson dies. Robert Thompson dies, in 1691, and he writes in his will that all of his land investments are to go to the male line in his family. Unfortunately, the male line in his family are his two grandsons who aren't of age yet. So it sets up this really difficult and complex estate settlement process that is not going to be easy for the estate to remain invested in this land. And that's a really diluted version of the story. It's much more complicated than that, but just realize that when Thompson dies, Coxe understands that it's basically over. There's no way, it's going to be very challenging for Coxe to go through with his plan because, again, he can't convince Penn to patent the property. Vincent's out, Thompson's out. Neither of the estates want to work with Coxe. So by 1692, Dr. Daniel Coxe, he throws up his hand. He says, I'm out. I am no longer interested in this great idea that I once had that's called the New Mediterranean Sea Company. So in 1692, he sells his 10,000 acre share. But again, remember at this point, it's not laid out. At this point, it's just 20,000 acres that he has a share in and the estate of Robert Thompson has a share in. He sells his 10,000 acre share to a group of investors known as the West New Jersey Society. West New Jersey Society is just a land speculation group that is investing in North American land. And I should clarify, I have been saying East New Jersey and West New Jersey a few times. There is that distinction because before 1702, there were two separate proprietary governments in New Jersey. There was West New Jersey and East New Jersey. In 1702, that's when they unify as a royal colony and they just become New Jersey. So that's why we see West New Jersey and East New Jersey sometimes. And remember all the difficulties William Penn or Daniel Coxe was having with William Penn about this property. That's all inherited by the West New Jersey Society. Now it's their problem. And they aren't too concerned about this 10,000 acre share in Chester County. They are managing the property from an ocean away. They have other land investments. So a lot of information can get very easily overlooked. There is, again, it's just very difficult for them to manage this property when they're not on the ground themselves. They're ministering it with agents, but they have other issues they're working with. So basically, this property, this 20,000 acres here, it gets overlooked for a long time. It's just not being settled because people are uncertain what the status actually is. So it gets overlooked for a very long time. And also remember, it's prime real estate. Coxe, Vincent, and Thompson, they were attracted to this area for a reason, mainly because it's located right here along the Schuylkill River. A lot of metal ores up there. There are some furs to be traded. It's along the Schuylkill, easy navigation to Philadelphia. It's prime real estate, but it's basically sitting there. After Coxe sells the property in 1692, it goes decades and it's not being used. In 1717, the Penn family, they're like, hey, we noticed no one's paying taxes for this property. And that was an issue for them because in 1712, so a few years earlier, William Penn, he suffers a stroke. After William Penn suffers his stroke, basically he has limited governing influence at that point. He gives his family a lot more influence in the managing and running of Pennsylvania. And after 1712, they realized there are some financial situations that they should be concerned about. One of them is they have this land that should be settled, but it's basically being ignored as prime real estate. No one's paying taxes for it. So in 1717, the Chester County Clerk of Courts, John Simcock, he sues what he refers to as non-residents, meaning the West New Jersey Society, on behalf of William Penn, the proprietor, for unpaid taxes. He's saying, no one has been paying taxes on this property for about 30 years. You owe the Penn family or the proprietary government £313 in back taxes. The court, unsurprisingly, they rule in favor of Simcock and William Penn, and they say, okay, the Chester County Sheriff, what he's going to do is he's going to take 467 acres from that 20,000 acre tract, and he's going to sell it to the highest bidder. The highest bidder then is going to take the money, give it to the county, and the county is going to use that for back taxes. Again, they haven't been paying taxes on that property for 30 years. They owe $313. The court is selling 467 acres to recoup the back taxes. Who buys it? Who is the highest bidder? And that takes us to part two, David Lloyd. Again, that was a very broad section. We're talking about English investors. I'm using a bunch of very broad language. That's because, again, the primary sources over here are limited. Hopefully this section, we're going to get a little bit more focused because we're talking about individual, David Lloyd, who actually lived over in Pennsylvania. He had land in Philadelphia. He had land in Chester, the city of Chester, and he's going, as we'll see, be highly or actively investing in what becomes Uwchlan Township. Every person we mentioned earlier, as opposed to William Penn, they never came over to North America. So they weren't really aware of what was happening on the ground over here. They were just talking about, all their communication was happening in letters. They weren't seeing what was happening. David Lloyd, though, again, he was actually over here. And he was the one who purchased the 467 acres that was sold in 1718. Who was David Lloyd? David Lloyd, he was a brilliant legal expert. He came over to Pennsylvania in 1686 to serve as William Penn's attorney general. William Penn needed someone to represent the legal matters of his colony, and he respected David Lloyd. So that's why David Lloyd came over here to serve as Pennsylvania's first attorney general. And many historians consider him laying the groundwork for Pennsylvania's judicial system. He was not only the attorney general, he later served in the Pennsylvania General Assembly. He served as the speaker. He served as the justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. He was at the forefront of a lot of the early legal situations happening in Pennsylvania. So he was a very influential individual in Pennsylvania's early legal system. He had a very impressive resume. But what's really interesting is not only was he the attorney for Pennsylvania in 1686, but in 1686, that same exact year, he is hired by the New Mediterranean Sea Company to serve as their attorney. Again, all of these people, Vincent, Coxe, Thompson, they're over in England. They need someone here to administer the property from the ground. They need someone to represent their legal claim to this area. So again, they respect David Lloyd, so they hire him as the attorney. So David Lloyd, he's aware of this area. He would have been the one working with the surveyors. He would have been the one reviewing maps, and he would have been the one looking at the paperwork involved with this 30,000 acres. So he was very well familiar with this area. David Lloyd, though, he was also a businessman. He wanted to make some money. And for the same reason, the individuals who were attracted to this area, David Lloyd, he looked a little further south. He looked at the area that would eventually become Uwchlan Township. Again, Uwchlan Township does not form until 1712, but from a very early period, about 1693, 94, I think, David Lloyd starts purchasing property in this general area. We know he couldn't purchase property in this area because it's claimed by the New Mediterranean Sea Company. So he looks further south to the area that becomes Uwchlan Township. At the time, it would have had two major roads in the area going from Lancaster to Philadelphia. It was right next to the Brandywine Creek. It was a prime real estate. So what David Lloyd did was he basically purchased cheap land in this area, and he wanted to flip it for profit. A local researcher who has done a lot of research in early Uwchlan Township, she basically mapped and drew out a lot of the early warrants and patents for Uwchlan Township, and a lot of them were for David Lloyd. And based on her calculations, before 1712, so before Uwchlan Township becomes a township or a municipality, David Lloyd had already purchased 4,100 acres in Uwchlan Township. That's a huge proportion of this township. Let's see. So when the opportunity arose for David Lloyd to purchase even more property in this area, he's going to jump at the opportunity. So in 1718, when Nicholas Fairlamb said, hey, I have 467 acres, it's going to the highest bidder, he probably published an advertisement for it in the local paper. David Lloyd, he was probably aware of the sale. He probably saw the advertisement for the paper. He probably actually went out there to go. Well, he didn't have to go out there because he knew the property, because again, he knew the New Mediterranean Sea Company. He had 4,100 acres in Uwchlan Township. So he purchased the property for 50 pounds. Again, remember, we knew the court wanted to collect 313 pounds for unpaid taxes. David Lloyd, he seemed to get a bargain. He only paid 50 pounds for the property for 467 acres. And again, this is important to keep in mind that this 20,000 acres, when the court said 467 acres was to be surveyed, it wasn't a specific section at this point. Basically, the court said someone who pays us the highest amount will get a warrant for 467 acres, and then it will be surveyed at a later date. So David Lloyd didn't pay the 50 pounds for a specific section of the property. He just paid 50 pounds for the right to 467 acres. So once he had the warrant for 467 acres, now came the decision. Okay, where does he want this property to be located? And it wasn't that hard of a situation for him, because remember, he is in Uwchlan Township. He is investing a lot of money in this general area. And then let's take a look at what's happening at this 20,000 acres. Again, we remember Coxe, he experienced a lot of frustrations with William Penn establishing his what he thought was his ownership of this area. He gets frustrated in 1692. He passes that frustration along to the West New Jersey Society. Hannah Callowhill Penn, she is the second wife of William Penn. She after William Penn's stroke, she has more of a say in the managing of the colony. She's frustrated because she realized that this is a very attractive section of land that's not being utilized. So she actually wrote to one of William Penn's close secretaries, James Logan, in 1724. And I think this is a really interesting quote. I'll read it. She says, "As I understand, there was a very considerable tract or tracts of land granted by my late husband," meaning William Penn, "and laid out many years since in the names of Sir Matthias Vincent, Daniel Coxe, Adrian Verhausen, and Benjamin Furley." Remember, that's because of the error in the 1687 map. It should be Major Thompson. They were to make settlement and improvements thereupon, and to perform with a certain time, deliver covenants and conditions on their part, which they have totally neglected, and consequently have forfeited all their pretensions to the said land through their not complying with the considerations and conditions of the grant. Therefore, I desire that you will look at the best, and you'll look into this matter and take good advice thereon in order to recover the lands, either by lease of ejectment or otherwise. So basically she's saying, my husband, William Penn, he gave this property, or he intended to give this property to these three men under the assumption that they would improve it, but they haven't. It's been, at this point, 30 years. They're sitting on it. No one's here. We are losing money. We need this land back. So what do? They start a series of litigation and lawsuits between the Penn family and the West New Jersey Society. This area actually eventually became Vincent Township, but in order to assert some self of PR and the sense that it was owned by the Penn family, they start referring to it as Callowhill Manor. That's again just kind of the Penn family saying, hey, this belongs to us. It doesn't belong to the West New Jersey Society. Before 1780, you will not find a single deed for Vincent Township, and that's because the Penn family prevented outright ownership. People couldn't own property in the area that became Vincent Township. So if we look back at this 20,000 acre section, there is not a single deed for this because, again, the Penn family, they said people can't own it. We first have to clean up the title rights because we are engaged in a lawsuit with the West New Jersey Society. Therefore, we're going to prevent anyone from owning it. So before 1780, you only see people leasing the property, which has significant impact for the development of West Vincent town, West Vincent and East Vincent. People weren't attracted to this area. People like David Lloyd, they wanted to purchase property that they knew they would have the deed to. They would be the owner. And because the Penn family, they weren't allowing ownership, it really prevented settlement in this area. And it really hurt the early development of Vincent Township. So again, think about the tough decision, or I should say the not so tough decision David Lloyd is thinking about. And he knows he has the right to 467 acres. He has to determine where he wants those 467 acres to be laid out. We know he's investing in Uwchlan Township. We know he's not interested in this 20,000 acres section because he wants to be the owner. That's it. He's a businessman. He has a business model which he wants to purchase property. He wants to improve it, clearing it, getting it, useful for farmers, and then he wants to sell to them for a profit. And because he can't be the owner of this property, he has no interest in buying property or buying the 467 acres anywhere in this section. So he has a pretty obvious choice, again, not there. He knows the 467 acres has to be somewhere adjacent to Uwchlan Township. That way he can basically petition the county court saying, hey, I bought this new property. I want it to be become a part of Uwchlan Township. That way I can pay taxes in Uwchlan Township and help and contribute to the settlement of Uwchlan Township. So again, the decision was not tough. He knows he has to lay out the 467 acres somewhere adjacent to Uwchlan Township. And I think we all know where this is going. It eventually becomes the thumb that we've been looking for. That it was a pretty easy decision for David Lloyd. Then the next question become, okay, why did he pick the thumb as opposed to a straight northwest to southeast line? It could have been a much cleaner tract of land as opposed to that weird shape. He could have just simply did a northwest southeast line, make it nice and easy, and annex this 467 acres into Uwchlan. But for that, all you have to do is look at the topography and the terrain of the area. Anyone who's ever traveled up Route 100 approaching Ludwig's Corner, you probably understand why David Lloyd didn't want that straight line, because the area around the West Vincent and Upper Uwchlan border, it's hilly, it's rocky, it's not attractive land. And remember, David Lloyd, he's a businessman. He wants to sell the property for a profit. And if he has really rocky and hilly and mountainous property, farmers aren't going to want to buy it because it's not very farmer friendly property. But there is one section in this area that is relatively flat and it has a nice creek, and that's the thumb. So that's how Upper Uwchlan got its thumb. David Lloyd, he had 467 acres he knew he needed to acquire. He knew it needed to be adjacent to Upper Uwchlan. So then at that point, he just acquires the best, most attractive land in the area. And this is a street view image, right? We see it's nice and flat. We even see some, some type of crop being grown there today. So it's good land, especially compared to the uneven, rocky, hilly terrain in the other sections of that border. So that's a very abbreviated version. Again, and once we know David Lloyd surveys this property in 1726, a group of Uwchlan Township residents, they get together, they petition the county court. They say, hey, we're our municipality. We've been here since 1712. There's some confusion about the border and the boundaries of our township. Would you mind sending a surveyor out there and just clarifying what the township border of Uwchlan Township is? And one, the description is, it includes the tract of land laid out to David Lloyd, and we see formerly taken in execution from the said tract laid out to Dr. Coxe. And this comment here is specifically referring to David Lloyd's 467 acre purchase. So that's how Upper Uwchlan acquired its thumb. Again, how did I learn about this story? Again, just by asking a very simple question: why does Upper Uwchlan Township look like this? It's almost, I'm not sure if anyone remembers that old TV show on or on the History Channel, how the states got their shapes, right? Behind every township in Chester County, there's a story, right? Why does every township look the way it does? Some of it's going to be very simple because there's a stream there, or because there's a road there, or because certain property owners wanted to be included in one township as opposed to the other. But the important part is there's a story behind every single municipality. There's a story. If we ask questions, we might get some of those really interesting stories. So that's my suggestion, is just be curious, ask questions, and then uncover those really cool, interesting stories like this one. I hope that was somewhat cohesive. Again, that's a very complex, nuanced story, and I try to present that in a very concise manner. If you want to review any of that, this presentation is being recorded. Again, I would recommend checking out that YouTube video I created, which is on our YouTube channel. Just go to our website, chesco.org/archives, and you'll see a link to our YouTube channel. If you want to, perhaps a more concise version of this presentation, you can listen to that, or you can take a look at those two publications I recommended at the beginning, Estelle Kremer and Albright Zimmerman. So I am happy to answer any questions that anyone might have about the presentation. Is anyone here or anyone in attendance, or is anyone from Upper Uwchlan, West Vincent area? That'd be very cool if you got a bit more information about your backyard. That's always the goal. Oops. And I will I want to just go back to those two publications because they're really great. I got a lot of the information from these two publications. So I just want to put them back on the screen before we depart. Oh, we have someone who actually their family has lived on the Thumb for over 50 years. That's great. I hope you don't mind me calling your property the Thumb. I've heard it referred to as the Arm. The Thumb is, again, that's just my terminology. I think if you look for Upper Uwchlan Thumb, no one else has called it this. That's kind of just what I refer to it as. Yep. So someone has asked about the sources used in the research. Basically, I would say all of the primary sources I use, as opposed to the court records, I used second. So basically, I looked at the transcriptions of them. So Albright Zimmerman, this account uses a lot of transcriptions of those primary sources that are over in England. There's a lot of letters written by Dr. Coxe, a lot of letters written by Penn and Vincent and Thompson that I basically got by looking at transcriptions of published in secondary sources. So unfortunately, I didn't look at any of the primary sources myself, but I used other people's transcriptions of them, which isn't always the best method. I'm an archivist. Anytime someone comes into the research room saying, oh, they saw so-and-so wrote this, I always recommend they visit the original source. That's always the best strategy. So I recognize I wasn't doing the best job, but again, just limited access to the archives over across the pond. So hopefully that answers your question. Oh, I'm glad that other people called it the Thumb as well. I'm glad I'm not the only one who thinks it looks like that. So, and I think that's just really interesting, right? We look at the Thumb, and it was a part of the English Empire, right? The king, and they might not have been directly involved with the property, like they may not have ever visited the property, but their actions surely have influenced our map, and we are still facing. The King of England, William Penn, Coxe, Lloyd, all of their actions are still directly impacting us today, right? Our map looks the way it does because of their actions. People in the Thumb, you pay taxes to Upper Uwchlan as opposed to West Vincent because of their actions. So I love the story just because it has these really broad themes, but you can see those broad themes on a very local micro level. That's a good question. I'm not sure about the congregation. I know Estelle Kremer's book. It's really great because she does talk about some of the local congregations. Unfortunately for this presentation, I didn't pay too much attention to that, but if you do look at Estelle's work, I know she mentions the congregations in the Vincents and the Pikeland, so you might want to take a look at that. All right. Happy to answer any other questions that people might have. Let's see. All right, so I am not seeing any more questions. I'm happy to answer. Everyone wants to answer. You can email us at ccarchives@chesco.org. Just Google Chester County Archives. You'll come to our homepage and you'll see our email listed there. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you rewatch the presentation, if you rewatch our YouTube video, you have any questions you want more information on, I'm happy to answer that. So feel free to reach out. Again, this presentation has been recorded. You should receive an email from the Chester County History Center early next week with a link to it if you want to review it. And just a reminder that next month, March 31st, we're having another Chats from the Stacks. Again, we'll be talking about the 1777 Chester County Property Atlas. If you're a member of the Chester County History Center, you will receive a discount code, which will make your ticket absolutely free. If you're not a member, you can purchase a ticket or you can become a member and support our educational programming. For more information on that, again, visit mycchc.org. And with that, I am going to sign off. Thank you, everyone, again, for attending tonight. I appreciate it. We appreciate your support. And I hope you learned something, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening. Take care.